Hello and welcome to the Game Lore Archives. Today we're discussing the Orc race. I'm sure you've noticed that this episode is much shorter than usual, and it's due to the massive racism against the Orcs that have caused this. To research an episode, either Joe and I will go ahead and read every single in-game book on the topic, fill in any blanks using the other bits of lore that could possibly go in there, and then write a script for you guys. Probably over half the books written about the Orcs focus very little on facts about them or their way of life, and focus more on the author's opinion of the race.
I mean, don't forget that Bethesda is very clever about their lore books, and they're written as they would be in real life, so basically that means that the books are written from the author's point of view, including any prejudices or narrow-mindedness that they have.
Now, this is a brilliant way of presenting written lore, as it makes the world just that much more believable, but it does mean that some of the books are wrong, just like in our world. Usually it doesn't happen too often, but this time it's resulted in very, very few facts to go off, which is why the episode is a lot shorter, just so we can ensure that we're accurate as possible, because we don't accept any racism here. Hashtag Orc Pride.
Orc Pride! Gotta love those guys. So, a couple of episodes we discussed how Saint Veloth's new religion was banished from Somerset Isle, so his followers started an exodus to Morrowind. What we didn't mention were the people who tried to stop this movement and keep the Aldmer to abandon their new religion. The loudest of the protesters was named Trini Mac, who was the strongest of the remaining Adda.
Who were the Aedra.
And Trini Mac is the champion of the High Elf religion to this day. Trini Mac followed Velothi, pleading with him to stop the movement. But when this didn't work, he spoke to Velothi's followers, trying to convince them to stop following the prophet.
As you know, if you watch the Chimera episode, Veloth was the prophet of the three Daedric princes, Boethia, Mephala and Ashura. And the Daedra are not beings you want to mess with. After a while of Trini Mac's mitherings, Boethia, the Daedric prince of plots, began to get annoyed, and so tricked Trini Mac into getting into her mouth. I have no idea how you'd track someone to do that.
Yeah, I would love to know what that conversation was.
Yeah, but unfortunately we never will. But as soon as he got in, Boethia's mouth snapped shut and consumed Trini Mac whole, and she assumed his form. While she was in his body, Boethia gathered the followers of the Etarda and told them the lies of the Aedra, saying that Trini Mac was the biggest liar of all.
Just also remember that all of this was said in Trini Mac's own voice, so he was basically confessing the lies of the Adda.
Once his name had been corrupted, Boethia spat Trini Mac out into the ground, returning Boethia to how she would usually look. The act, however, corrupted and destroyed Trini Mac. Not just his body, but his very soul. And as he was spat out, Trini Mac was no more, and the Daedric prince Malakath was reborn in his place. Trini Mac's closest followers were transformed alongside Malakath and became the Orsimer race.
The transformation turned the orc's skin deep green with huge teeth and guttural tones, much like a goblin. However, it also gave them unwavering strength and endurance, and as a race they survived hardships that would overwhelm any other race. Although their society is small, rough around the edges, there is a fierce loyalty that runs deeply through their culture. They are ferocious warriors with the ability to keep fighting. Even after an orc's bones are broken and he is bleeding, an orc will continue to stand and fight. Some say orcs that have been knocked into the dirt during combat are even more deadly. It is this deadly strength that has caused the orcs to be ostracized, along with how the race looked, because they're hideous. As their skin and teeth were so goblin-like, the other races immediately presumed they were goblinken.
Which is the race that the ogres, goblins and gremlins are all lumped into.
And thought they were mindless beasts to be killed. This is basically one of the reasons why orcs are an enemy creature in Arena and Daggerfall instead of a playable race. Between the events of Daggerfall and Morrowind, the Imperial Emperor allowed orcs to join the Imperial Empire, granting them safety, which is why they were then a playable race. However, this racism has not fully disappeared. Even their name means outcast. The word Orsimer, translated in Elven, is the pariah folk.
Pariah is literally another word for outcast.
Because of the racism, the majority of the orcs fled northwards to Southall of Skyrim.
Some did flee to Valenwood and became what's known as wood orcs, which are kind of a more nimble variation of a standard orc. And that means that if rumours of Elder Scrolls 6 Valenwood are true, the orcs could look very different than in other games, and it would be really cool if they did.
That would be cool. And the orcs that fled northwards eventually scattered into various clans, setting into separate strongholds that can be found throughout Skyrim, High Rock and Hammerfell.
The majority of orcs that live in these strongholds live a simple life. They have a rigid class system where an orc is elected to do a certain thing for their clan, and many traditions are followed.
Although these traditions do change from clan to clan.
So every orc is trained at birth to defend their stronghold and clan brothers. Each orc will have a weapon and armour forged specifically for them at the stronghold's forge. Taking into consideration the orcs' incredible strength, and that orcs are classed as some of the greatest blacksmiths in Tamriel, an orc stronghold is a well-defended place indeed. Every clan is led by a male chief, who is the only male allowed to take wives. These marriages are usually arranged to solidify alliances between clans. Many wives are often taken, with the most important being his hunt wife. Now, we don't know every kind of wife they can take, but we do know of forge wives, hearth wives, and shield wives, and each kind of wife take responsibility for their task.
So, pretty self-explanatory to be fair. Forge wives are in charge of the ford, shield wives are in charge of personal guards for the chief, and so on and so forth.
And this makes them really important members of every clan. The chief himself actually only takes charge of any battles, raiding parties and wars, and as the chief is responsible for all fighting things, the new chief is selected by fighting his competitors.
Because orcs don't have their own province and either live in their capital city or in strongholds, the province laws are ignored for their own internal code, called the Code of Morlock.
Morlock is another name for Malakath, the Daedric prince.
And again, this code does differ from clan to clan and is less rigid from most race laws. Some of them always respect forging and blacksmithing, follow the traditional roles of the clan's chief and his wives. A new chief is selected through challenge in combat. A price must be paid for any crime, either in gold or blood price. Jail isn't really a thing.
And just to clarify that, so if a crime's committed and you're caught and you can't afford to pay for what you've done, you must almost bleed until the victim of your crime is satisfied. Now, because of an orc's strength and ability to keep on going, he can bleed a lot. Orcs have a lot of blood. So this punishment doesn't always lead to death, depending on the crime, but it still seriously hurts and can weaken them a lot.
Some of the others are: an insult to your honour must be avenged, and to die in combat is an honour and pleases Malakath.
Most of the clan's laws, traditions and history are also told through storytelling, leading every clan to have a really rich and vibrant oral tradition, as they believe in storytellings instead of writing books, and a book about orc traditions has never been published by a member of an Orsimer race, only from outsiders. However, this oral tradition changes in between the different clans, and it has led to some issues and different beliefs between the clans. The biggest of these is about the Orsimer's religion. So there's two factions of the same faith have started to appear, and orcs everywhere are debating which is the true faith.
The first of these factions are the Traditionalists. These orcs believe that Malakath is their lord and god, and everything an orc feels comes from him. Malakath reinforces the belief that orcs' race was betrayed. They feel clans must stand alone, with the strongest ruling them and the weak cast out. And three things should always be kept in mind, called the three constant truths,
which are the stronghold, the grudge, and the fury of Malakath.
It's because of these truths that orcs rarely settle and farm the land, and would rather move freely and hunt and pillage.
The orcs that believe that Malakath should be worshipped believe that the afterlife promises rewards of immortality with endless food and drink and a constant battle within the Ashen Forge.
The Forge is a representation of the three truths of Malakath.
The Ashen Forge sits in the centre of Malakath's plane of oblivion, called the Ash Pit, which is said to stretch endlessly beyond Aetherius itself, and every worthy orc is granted access to the ash pit. Upon entry, every orc is passed through the Ashen Forge fires, which burns hotter than the sun, so their grudges can be washed away and forgotten and forged into the next generation of mortal orcs. And it also allows the immortal orcs free to collect a new set of grudges relating to their new existence. Once this is done, every orc is then made into a war chief with 1,000 wives.
The second religious faction is quite different in that the faith's beliefs are pretty consistent no matter who tells the story. Unlike the Traditionalists' religion, which differs slightly with every retelling, these orcs believe that they should follow Malekith's original form, Trini Mac, who is a culmination of their dreams, desires, and personifies their culture and civilization. Trini Mac stands for unity among the clans so that they can be elevated above their violent instincts to live as equals among the other races.
So far in this episode, we've largely discussed the orcs' strongholds. However, as we mentioned earlier, orcs do have a capital city called Orsinium.
And the orcs that live there are known as Iron Orcs.
And the ones in strongholds are tribal orcs. So
Correct.
far we know of Iron Orcs, Tribal Orcs and Wood Orcs.
Wood Orcs.
Whether there's any more, I couldn't find evidence of, but there might be. Now, there has actually been many versions of Orsinium throughout the areas, and bad luck just seems to follow it everywhere. It started when an orc named Turog got tired of being an outcast, and so rallied the orcs with a vision of a great city that the rest of Tamriel would fear and respect. They built high walls into the rocks in a mountain in High Rock, and slowly the clans started to migrate into the city, meaning that it needed to expand. This need to expand and grow worried the other races in the immediate area, so the Bretons and Redguards joined forces and started a 30-year siege, until the large walls that once defended the orcs became their undoing, and eventually the city was destroyed.
Now the city was rebuilt and destroyed numerous times throughout the First Era until it was finally saved by the Akaviri. A member of the Seesi took over the Roman Empire during the Second Era, and although controversial, the Seesi did do some good things whilst ruling. One of these things was to accept the orcs as part of the Roman Empire and the building of Frostbreak Fortress to help protect their city. This did work for a time, but once again the city was destroyed when the Akaviri rulership ended and the Treaty of the Orcs was forgotten.
After this happened, the city wasn't rebuilt until two Breton kings,
King Emeric and King Rancer,
started a war for rulership over the Breton people. Now, King Emeric asked Kurog, leader of an orc clan, for help, saying that he would give Kurog ownership of a new city. Kurog's clan answered the call, and an alliance formed between the Bretons and the orcs, which would eventually lead to the Daggerfall Covenant. Now, Kurog had learned from past mistakes, and instead of just rebuilding Orsinium, he chose to change the location of the city, building into the mountains of Hrothgar on the border of Skyrim. This will become known as the Second Orsinium, and it's the one that you've probably explored in Elder Scrolls Online.
Sometime after the Alliance Wars, the Orcs lost all alliances and stood alone. This encouraged views that they were mindless beasts again to sweep through the mind of the younger generations. The Second Orsinium was eventually destroyed, and the Orcs again were seen as Goblinken. While seen as beasts, Nova Orsinium was built, which can be seen in the game Daggerfall. But this too was destroyed, and the Orcs, angered by the constant cycle of destruction, go to Emperor Uriel Septim IV and requested they be made part of the Imperial Empire. The Emperor allows the alliance, and by the time the events of Morrowind happen, the Orcs are fully accepted into the society.
Although there are still some people that just see them as little more than beasts.
Racists. Yeah. And the latest reincarnation of Orsinium is unknown, but according to a Skyrim loading screen, it can be found between High Rock and Skyrim. So maybe the Orcs' luck has finally changed. Maybe.
Final thing I should put in this episode, as I'm sure some of you will go, that's not my understanding, that's wrong. You might have heard when Elder Scrolls Online first came out that there was mistakes in the lore, and this was largely for the orcs. So there are a few inconsistencies that don't always make sense. Before Elder Scrolls Online, orcs were never accepted into society until Morrowind, now they have been. So I certainly tried my best to fill in any gaps in the timeline, but there was some inconsistencies.
Yeah, thanks Bethesda.
Definitely. At least didn't blame it on a Dragon Break this time.
Yeah, true.
But thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.